6.5 miles is a long way down, and the strange thing is that the height itself is almost the least dangerous part of the equation. Most people who hear "fell out of a plane" assume the story ends there, that the altitude alone makes survival impossible. But the physics of what actually happens to a human body between the aircraft and the ground are genuinely weirder than that, and a small number of real people have lived through the whole thing to prove it. What actually determines whether you survive has almost nothing to do with how high you started and everything to do with one specific moment near the end. So what actually happens? Most people assume it's over immediately, that the height alone is what kills you. But the physics of falling from a plane are way weirder and way more survivable than almost anyone expects. We're going to walk through exactly what your body experiences from the moment you leave the aircraft to the moment you hit the ground. And at the end of this, you'll understand why a handful of real people have actually lived through it. Let's start with the first thing that breaks everyone's brain. You've just fallen out of the plane. You're accelerating fast, stomach in your throat, wind absolutely hammering you. And here's where the physics does something nobody expects. After roughly 13 to 14 seconds, you stop speeding up. You reach 99% of terminal velocity within the first 10 seconds of freefall. For a person falling belly down with arms and legs out, that's around 120 miles per hour, or about 200 kilometers per hour. After that, air resistance is pushing up on you just as hard as gravity is pulling you down, and you're done accelerating, which means something genuinely strange. Falling from 35,000 feet doesn't mean you hit the ground dramatically faster than falling from a few thousand feet. You just get much, much longer to think about it. But here's the part people always miss. 120 miles per hour is not your maximum speed. Not even close. Your body position changes everything. Spread yourself out flat, belly toward the earth, and you fall at around 120 miles per hour. Tuck into a head-down position, arms tight to your sides, and you can push that closer to 150 or even 180 miles per hour. Your body is essentially an aerodynamic object, and you're the one controlling the settings. Elite speed skydivers take this to its logical extreme. The Fédération Aéronautique Internationale has recorded speeds exceeding 500 kilometers per hour in specialized speed skydiving. So you're not just falling. In a very real sense, you're flying, just doing it badly. Here's where it gets interesting from a survival standpoint. Movies make a fall from altitude feel like it lasts about 3 seconds. In reality, from cruising altitude, you are in the air for minutes. The United States Parachute Association estimates roughly 74 seconds of freefall from 13,000 feet at standard terminal velocity. From a commercial airliner at 35,000 feet, the fall is considerably longer than that. You've reached terminal velocity. The wind is deafening, and you can see the ground coming up to meet you from miles away. So your brain, if it's working, starts asking, where do I want to land? Most people's first instinct is water. Water seems soft. Water seems forgiving. And that instinct is almost completely wrong. At 120 miles per hour, water doesn't behave like water. It behaves like concrete. The surface tension and density of water at that impact speed make it essentially a solid object. The sea is not your friend here. What you actually want is something that will break, bend, collapse, or slow you down progressively. Something that stretches the deceleration out over time instead of stopping you in a single brutal instant. This is the core physics of surviving a fall, and it's worth really understanding. You're traveling at 120 miles per hour. At some point, you're going to be traveling at 0 miles per hour. The only question is how fast that transition happens. A concrete surface does it in a fraction of a second, but something that compresses, shatters, or gives way can spread that same deceleration across a much longer window of time. And that window is the difference between life and death. World War II gave us some of the most extreme proof of this principle ever recorded. Alan McGee, an American airman, fell from an altitude of 22,000 feet, more than 4 miles, and crashed through the roof of the Saint-Nazaire train station in France. The glass panels shattered and absorbed much of the force of his impact. Beneath the broken glass, interior furnishings and structural elements further slowed him down just enough. He suffered 28 shrapnel wounds, a broken nose, eye damage, a punctured lung, kidney damage, a fractured right leg, and his right arm was nearly severed. He was captured by German forces and spent the rest of the war as a prisoner, but he was alive. Then there's Nicholas Alcemade. On March 24, 1944, Alcemade was the rear gunner on an Avro Lancaster bomber during a raid over Germany. At 18,000 feet, a German fighter ripped through their aircraft with cannon fire. Flames erupted through the fuselage. Alcemade turned to grab his parachute and watched it burn before his eyes. Because his parachute was unserviceable, he jumped from the aircraft without one, preferring to die by impact rather than burn to death. His body struck a patch of pine trees, which absorbed much of the impact, and he landed on deep snow, which further cushioned his fall. He was able to move his arms and legs and suffered only a sprained leg. When German interrogators heard his story, they refused to believe him. They insisted he had buried his parachute somewhere and that he was a spy. But when they sent men to investigate the landing site, they were amazed to find that the remains of Alcemade's parachute were indeed still in the wreckage of the plane. Notice the pattern in both of these stories. It's never person hits ground. It's always person hits something that gives, then something that gives a little more, then the ground. Each stage takes a little more speed off. Each stage buys a little more time. That's the mechanism. And nobody demonstrates that mechanism more dramatically than Vesna Vulović. January 26, 1972. Vesna Vulović was a flight attendant on board JAT Yugoslav Airlines Flight 367. The flight path between Stockholm in Sweden and Belgrade in Serbia took the aircraft over Czechoslovakia, and that is where the plane exploded into 3 pieces. Vesna was just 23 years old at the time. As the cabin depressurized, the other passengers and crew were believed to have been sucked out of the plane into freezing temperatures. Vesna's survival was attributed to her being pinned down by a food cart in the tail end of the fuselage. That section of the plane came down separately, and it came down onto a wooded, snow-covered mountainside. Vesna Vulović survived a fall from 10,160 meters, 33,333 feet over Czechoslovakia. To this day, this remains the highest fall survived without a parachute ever recorded. She suffered a fractured skull, 3 broken vertebrae, broken legs, broken ribs, and a fractured pelvis. Following the incident, she spent days in a coma and was hospitalized for several months. Her physicians believed her naturally low blood pressure kept her heart from bursting on impact. It's worth being honest about one thing here. In 2009, a journalistic investigation claimed that the aircraft had broken up at a much lower altitude than stated in the official accident report. One of the journalists did concede, however, that the evidence was only circumstantial. Guinness still recognizes the record, and honestly, even if the altitude was lower, the survival itself is not in dispute, and the physics behind it are exactly the same. She wasn't a skydiver who fell clean through the air and somehow survived the landing. She was wrapped in wreckage. The wreckage hit trees and snow at an angle. Every layer of that sequence was another stage of deceleration. The fall didn't kill her because the stop wasn't instant. That's the answer to the question you clicked on. Could you survive falling out of a plane? Technically, yes. It has happened, but the height is almost beside the point. Experts believe the key to Vulovic's survival was being trapped inside a section of the aircraft's fuselage, which subsequently landed at an angle on a heavily wooded and snowy mountainside. The same principle saved Alan McGee through a glass roof and Nicholas Alcemade through a canopy of pine trees. What saved all of them wasn't luck with the height. It was luck with the landing. Specifically, a landing that took long enough. The most important question was never how far you fall. It was always how you stop.